You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. Sex scenes have been part of movies and television shows for decades, but the way they're created has changed dramatically in recent years. Today, many productions rely on intimacy coordinators, professionals who help choreograph intimate scenes while ensuring that actors, directors, and film crews can work together safely, collaboratively, and creatively. But what exactly does an intimacy coordinator do? How are intimate scenes actually planned and rehearsed? In today's episode, we're pulling back the curtain on a truly fascinating job. We'll explore how intimate scenes are really made, why carefully choreographed intimacy often leads to more authentic performances, how depictions of sex on screen have evolved over time, and what it takes to create moments that are emotionally compelling while respecting everyone's boundaries. My guest is Laura Desiree, the creative director of Sanctum, a private members-only erotic society known for its immersive events that blend live performance, fantasy, intimacy, and consent-driven exploration. She is a Level 2 certified intimacy coordinator with years of experience in erotic media and sex-positive storytelling. Through her work with Sanctum, Laura curates experiences that are culturally relevant, artistically elevated, and rooted in clear boundaries, consent, and discretion. Her work centers on reframing sex as something that can be beautiful, intentional, and openly discussed, while helping people better understand the role that fantasy, communication, and erotic expression can play in building healthier, more connected, intimate lives. This is going to be another fascinating conversation that you won't want to miss. Stick around, and we're going to jump in right after the break. Do you want to learn more from me in the form of an online or in-person course? Become Sexceptional by getting certified with Sexual Health Alliance, where you can learn from yours truly and a number of top sexuality scholars. Each year with Sexual Health Alliance, I teach courses like Fantasies Around the World, as well as immersive study abroad classes in several exciting countries. Join these programs and become a certified sexuality professional at the same time. From sex therapists to sex educators, sex coaches to sexologists, Sexual Health Alliance streamlines your path to certification while allowing you to learn from leading experts in the field. Most importantly, you'll gain the knowledge, skills, and credentials that you need to excel. Become Sexceptional and connect with world-class experts and an engaged community of sexuality professionals from all across the globe. Start your path to certification today at sexualhealthalliance.com. Hi, Laura, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
It's wonderful to have you here. So you've done some work as an intimacy coordinator for film and television. And so today we're going to go behind the scenes to talk about how intimate scenes are actually created. But before we get into that, I want to go back for a moment. So intimacy coordinators are a relatively new profession, despite the fact that sex scenes have long been part of film and television. So before intimacy coordinators existed, how were those scenes typically handled? And what were some of the problems or shortcomings with the old way of doing things that created the need for this new profession?
Sure. You nail on the head. Intimacy coordination is an answer to the Me Too experience that we had in our culture in ending some workplace harm and some injustice around bodily autonomy, sexual autonomy. This was something that was, I believe, a very necessary move to creating ethical and deeply intentional art today, and we can continue telling those stories. So before intimacy coordination as a profession, it was really case by case methodology that these directors and these productions would go about it how they saw fit. You had some of these auteurs, directors that would very much micromanage what you would see on screen in an intimate scene. And sometimes these methods were done with immense discomfort and disrespect to the boundaries or the, let's say, the comfort levels and the preferences of the performers that were embodying it. We have a reality in this world that so many folks that make a living as performers, as actors specifically, we have a mentality in us that can often just lean into yes when something is asked of us. I mean, it really is the dynamic of being a performer beneath a director, right? You do have someone calling the shots and you are there to follow that lead. So in the past, you would have some really, I can say horrific cases. I think about the Marlon Brando film Last Tango in Paris by Bertolucci. And the experience on that set was famously so horrific for the young actress that was involved. There was a lot of pushing boundaries with full capture of that experience on film. So a lot of the discomfort that you see in that movie between the two performers, Brando and the young actress, is real. It's real discomfort in the moment of having your boundaries overridden by the request of someone else. So this can happen in very micro ways. This can happen in very macro ways. And so intimacy coordination is very much that line in the sand that asks all parties involved to take that pause and to assess how we proceed, respecting everyone along the way.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And, we've heard a lot of stories recently where actresses have come out and talked about past negative experiences they had in the time before intimacy coordinators existed. I'm thinking of some reels I've seen with Sharon Stone where she talks about that famous scene in Basic Instinct where she crosses and uncrosses her legs. And she was told and assured by the director, if I'm remembering this story correctly, that her genitalia was not going to be shown on screen. And she didn't realize till she actually went to the screening of the film that they had filmed her genitalia without her consent. And then it was shown for the entire world to see. And, that's really one of the core issues that intimacy coordinators are here to address, which is just even the very basic fundamental issues of consent and what the actors and performers are actually comfortable with doing and having shown on screen.
And it's different between film and theater. There's so many differences in those two productions. But in that case in particular, we are talking about framing of camera. We're talking about where that break in frame exists, because it's one thing to direct a performer to maybe complete an action that's part of the methodology of really creating that character and really falling into the surrender of portraying them. Sure, you get that with a lot of method acting. And there can be some decisions that people do find a little bit dangerous in method acting. Sure. But in this case, we're talking about framing. We're talking about where a camera's frame limits end. And so, yeah, that's exactly where a danger can be.
So some people might assume that intimacy coordinators simply make sure that everyone consents before filming begins, but I know the role is much broader than that. So can you walk us through what happens from the moment that an intimacy coordinator is brought onto the project? Like, where does it begin from before you even are doing any kinds of rehearsals up until the point where the scene is actually filmed?
Sure. The most ideal scenario and timeline is that the intimacy coordinator is brought in, perhaps even when casting is still being locked, because we need time to understand the project, the production, and to look at if there's a screenplay or script. What we want to do is understand what these intimate scenes are, where they are within the storytelling itself. A lot of the times, we as a society are conditioned to thinking that intimacy is a depiction of penetrative sex, and it's certainly not. There's a varying degree of what intimacy could be, right? There could be an embrace, a handhold, a come on, a verbal come on that has an effect to the receiving end. So to the performer that's receiving maybe an enormous amount of sexual language, that's an intimate scene. And so what we want to do is we want to scan the script and screenplay. We want to find where those moments are and then speak with the director to understand what their vision is for it, because it's not about canceling these scenes. I think that's where a lot of Hollywood gets it wrong. You see actors like Michael Douglas, who of course famously was just one of the main guys in those 80s psychosexual thrillers. He really was like such a leading man in the erotic films that were so popular in that era. I've seen him make public declarations saying these are the worst new additions to the Hollywood experience of having an intimacy coordinator. They're getting in the way of creation. And that's not it. What we want to do is, the very beginning, understand in the story why it's there, how the director envisions it, and then talk a little bit about including details of, yes, what the camera and the filming of this might look like, what the framing of this might look like. And then it's our job as intimacy coordinators to to also do our own investigative work around the context. So let's say it's a film set in the 1960s in one of the southern states, and it's between characters of two different races. And we're having a very loving and enthusiastic, consensual experience of, some kind of physicality between two performers. Okay, but they're living in a very charged climate. They're living in a social political climate that might not be as enthusiastic about these two people pursuing this affinity they have for each other. So with that in mind, is there a change to how they interact? And of course, that's just one example, right? But if you really look and hone in on what that moment of intimacy is, and you understand the context, you then inform both the director what you understand this to be, because it might, leave way. And this is where it gets a little bit difficult because directors don't always want to be told how that scene could change. They have their own vision and they're right to it. But you do want to let them know, hey, looking at where this is set, this might be a consideration to make. And then with the performers themselves, you also want to inform them because it's going to make the work that much more embodied, that much more powerful. I believe it makes the work that much more profound when you do have a deep understanding of the context of what that intimacy is existing within.
Yeah, and I think you raised a lot of really important points there because when people hear the term intimacy coordinator, I think the assumption is that they're thinking only about filming these very explicit sex scenes. Like they might be thinking about some scenes from a show like Heated Rivalry, right? Where you've got some hot sex that's happening, right? But intimacy can encompass so much more than that. Yes, some scenes are passionate, but others are awkward. Some are funny. Some are emotionally vulnerable. Some are really uncomfortable and some are even traumatic, right? So the work that an intimacy coordinator does is going to span a whole bunch of different contexts. And it's not just about the sort of physical choreography. There's also this kind of emotional choreography that goes into it as well, because as you were saying, like there's this whole context that's surrounding the scene.
Yeah, there's also a very important, what I believe to be a boundary in the emotional context, which is as an intimacy coordinator, you might be along for the experience an actor has when they realize this is emotionally impacting them. Maybe what they are embodying and depicting in this production, maybe this scene that they're doing has just opened a Pandora's box of historic hurt, ache, emotional overload, trauma that's inside of them. And our job is not to process that for them, to do that healing for them. That is not at all within the jurisdiction of intimacy coordination. And I think, again, some intimacy coordinators, because we are very new as a workforce, you have some folks that, when that moment happens, because it does, they feel an enormous responsibility because they're not only the support that a performer has through the intimate experience in depicting whatever the sensual scene is, but they feel that it is their job to also be the safe house that then gets that person out alive. And that is where we have to be very careful because we are not HR. So we might have a talent that realizes, oh my gosh, this scene is stirring up an enormous amount of ache for me, and I'm having a hard time returning to myself after a day's work. Then it's our job to advise, hey, is this something you need to take a break from? Is this something that we can exist within while we integrate some supportive therapy outside of the production? Can that start now? These are considerations that we have to make along the way. And I think it can get a little bit muddy and a little bit murky because, obviously we are so attuned as intimacy coordinators to watching for those signals, right? Those little somatic tells that something is not right. And it is our job to stop and to pause and to just check in. But at that point, if something is identified, it's not our job to solve it.
Yeah, and I think this is important for people in any industry, any profession, is knowing your lane, right? Where you're, as an intimacy coordinator, you're not HR, and you're also not a therapist or healthcare provider either, right? So if you're seeing that a performer is struggling or having issues with the scene, the role is to help them get the resources that they need to address that, not for you to take on that sole responsibility. So early on, a lot of people were worried that bringing an intimacy coordinator onto the set would make intimate scenes feel very clinical or less authentic. But many actors and performers now say the opposite, that it actually improves performances. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how choreographing an intimate scene down to even the smallest details can actually result in better chemistry.
100%. What we're doing when we rehearse and when we block out the physicality of an intimate scene, we're building confidence because we aren't cameras rolling. We're on stage. We have an audience in front of us. It's now or never. What we're doing is we're actually ensuring that both parties, we're all involved, know what's happening. There aren't unknowns. When there's unknowns, yes, in real life, sure, some of those can be fun and exciting and sexy and spontaneous. But when we are performing this work and we're performing sensual scenes and intimate, deep intimacy with people that we don't know and maybe don't have an attraction to, it is important that that confidence and that trust between each other is there. So what we end up doing is eliminating the unknowns that can keep us from really surrendering to the work. And you get these performers that they really aspire to giving it their all and having that performance of a lifetime and lighting up whatever, whether it's stage or screen. And I want to see that happen for them as well. But we can often hit that little roadblock and doubt ourselves and perhaps get just a little bit self-conscious when some of those decisions are up to us as individuals and we can no longer live in the moment of what we know is safe and what we know has been rehearsed. And that's where we run into danger, right? That's where someone thinks a touch on this part of their co-star's body, well, that's okay, because this is what my character's instinct is, but it's not what we've talked about. It's not what we've established as okay, comfortable. I like to build a container with talent, with performers. I build a container that might be even more equipped than what ends up in the scene itself. So of course we'll get to this, I'm sure, the inventory of what is allowed and what's not allowed. But when we are in like a heated scene, and let's say there's choreography that's very intentional, the shirt comes off here, the belt gets undone here, the hand goes through the back of the hair here. Sure. I just want to make sure that if that other hand that we haven't been talking about lands on the body, we're okay with it. So there's a number of protocols that we do to establish that trust and that bodily safety between co-stars as well. So I actually believe it makes the most explosive work possible, the most profound, those huge moments where you're sitting in an audience going, oh my gosh, I believe this. That happens when trust and confidence come together.
Let me introduce you to Soaking Wet from VB Health. It's a doctor-formulated blend of 2 prebiotics and 3 probiotics that promote total vaginal health, as well as 3 vitamins and minerals that promote vaginal wetness and overall sexual health. VB Health is on a mission to create supplements that work using scientifically backed ingredients. They take quality seriously, with each batch produced and tested by 2 separate third-party labs for safety and effectiveness. They even share their third-party lab results publicly. VB Health is a physician-owned and woman-owned business that has happy customers across all 50 states and over 45 countries. VB Health also just dropped a new product that I'm excited about called Energy Boost. In fact, they have a whole range of supplements to support you both in and out of the bedroom. Make every encounter slipperier, sexier, and downright sensational. It's time to get soaking wet and keep the good times coming, literally. And the best part? Soaking Wet is formulated by doctors at VB Health, and it works. Visit soakingwet.com and use code Justin for 10% off, or click the link in the show notes. Yeah, it sort of reminds me a little bit of some of the exercises that sex therapists often recommend to their clients, like where they create these yes, no, maybe lists of like, here are the things that I'm okay with, here are the things that I'm absolutely not okay with, and here are the things that maybe if the circumstances are right, I could be okay with. And that's a really useful thing for the average everyday couple to engage in so that they're clear and on the same page about what their boundaries are and what they know their partner likes and what they know they don't like. And, when you have that understanding, that can create more trust, more security, and lead to hotter sex because you kind of know what to expect and you know what your partner desires. And so it really is kind of the same thing in this world of intimacy where you're just wanting to have that very clear, very explicit communication so that you're on the same page about things and there aren't any unexpected negative surprises later on.
Micro negotiations, that is such a confidence killer, right? It really rattles the foundations, and that goes, it throughout life. That's not just when we're in a performance container. That's throughout life. Micro negotiations can be incredibly challenging to navigate.
Absolutely. So, as we've discussed many times before on this show, consent isn't something that's just negotiated once and then forgotten, right? People's comfort level can change over time. So, how do you create an environment where performers genuinely feel free to speak up, to change their mind, or to renegotiate boundaries, even if they're working under tight deadlines or significant production pressures?
1,000% transformation in consent and what it feels like in the body, and what does feel like a yes, that can change day by day by day. So, what I like to do is establish very early on with talent that we are going to check in at the top of a workday together, whether it's rehearsal or show itself. I want to check in and make sure that all parties involved in today's intimate scenes have the chance to say how they're feeling. Because sometimes there's an irritability you wake up with that has nothing to do with the job that we're doing on stage today or the scene that we're filming. But we want to be mindful of it. And it's not to halt the work that's going to get done. It's just to know that that exists in the body and in the comfort levels. And so if we can communicate that ahead of time, we can find out, well, what do you need to get this done today? What's going to make the job more pleasurable? And everyone freaks out about hearing pleasure. They're like, isn't it supposed to just be work? No, it can be pleasurable as well. And it should be pleasurable, especially when it's something we're deeply passionate about. Making art that is brave and that is unafraid and that confronts subject matter should be made. And for many of us as artists, it makes us feel incredibly purposeful. So how do we do that safely? We make space that at the top of every day or every time we gather, we can host a conversation saying, today is a unique, brand new, fresh start. Let's check in. How are we feeling? And it's really that simple, right? And we listen to each other. And then if there is something that needs to be addressed, we ask, how are we going to make today possible? Are there any considerations or changes that we might want to have in place here? And it is our job as well as intimacy coordinators to know what those backup plans look like and to communicate that with a director as well.
Yeah, because you kind of sit at the intersection of the performers and the director. And, you've got to take into account the performer's comfort level with everything, but also the director's creative and artistic vision. And so there's certain negotiation that needs to happen across all of those parties there to make sure that this fits and works for everyone. Now, film and television have changed dramatically in recent years, with a lot of productions pushing boundaries around nudity, sexuality, and representation. So we're regularly seeing intimate scenes now on streaming television that would have been totally unthinkable to be shown on TV just a few decades ago, from full frontal nudity to group sex to kink to LGBTQ sex. So from your perspective, what have you noticed in terms of changes in how intimacy scenes have been depicted over the years? And do you think that intimacy scenes are becoming more representative of the broad range of sexual practices that people are engaging in real life?
That's a great observation, because I feel yes and no with this one in particular. We are 100% seeing a much more varied, varied, and diverse representation of sexuality, sexual behaviors, sexual proclivities, 100%. We also have an appetite for the extreme like never before. So we have a glamorization and glorification of some areas of the sexual experience that I don't think are, if you're not literate around some of the, let's say, subject matter in a show like Euphoria, you are just hit with the immense system overload of the extremity of it, right? Of just the almost the depravity of it as well. I've seen so many articles about, how depraved and how unnecessary, just exploitative and grotesque the sexual subplots in that show have been. And so we have this appetite for it. I believe that that's just a part of our culture today. Yes, we are seeing some wonderful, more ethical depictions of sexuality. One of my favorites that I still go to in recent contributions would be, though I don't think Baby Girl is necessarily the best representation of kink in its full regards, I do think that it introduced a lot of views into solo self-pleasuring and that experience that we'd never seen before. And I'm talking specifically about that opening scene introduction of Nicole Kidman's character, where she has this fake orgasm with her husband. And it was so bad. I'm sitting in the theater watching this going, really, this movie's awful. It's trash. This is absolute trash. And I didn't realize that it would be contrasted almost immediately with her masturbating on the floor, practically humping something very naively. It reminded me immediately. I sat in the theater with a kind of dripping, almost shame that I'd been discovered. It reminded me of how I learned self-pleasure as a young person. And I thought, oh my God, this is known by the world that we did this thing, that we just humped something on the floor. Like, yeah, to see that blew my mind. I was so happy because so often, especially when it comes to self-pleasure by a female character, it's always done in this very spread, fantastical way. We're on our back. We're almost dripping like a Renaissance painting with, a hand between the thighs, and everything's very visible. And it just hasn't been presented the way they did in Baby Girl. So that to me was one of the great signs of, yeah, more of that honesty. And it does take a very literate audience to watch that, to watch any of the sex in today's media culture, and to digest it purposefully, maybe to investigate where it lives in their own life, their own preferences, their own identity. Because at the same time, we are also in a culture of extreme shock content addiction. And that can sometimes get in the way of more deeply examining sex in our own lives, and maybe even keeping it in that sort of dangerous taboo, which I think at this point it's 2026, really.
Right. So, I mean, we've come a long way in terms of the kinds of things that we're representing in intimate scenes. But as you were speaking, I was also thinking about this question of, well, so we have more representation, but do we have more realism necessarily? Like your job as an intimacy coordinator is, to make sure everybody's comfortable with everything that's happening, and to, produce the hottest scenes that you can that align with what the director and the performers and everybody wants to do. But it doesn't necessarily look like the sex that people are going to be having in real life, right? And so I think with media and with pornography, we do need to have that literacy about, well, this is, entertainment, but it's not necessarily education. And so I think something that's always important to keep in mind whenever we're consuming sexual media is we often try to measure up or compare to what we're seeing on screen, when in reality, maybe that's not the right metric that we should be applying.
That's so important as a consideration because, the job isn't that every sex scene needs to be realistic. I don't believe in that. I think that there's immense integrity in depicting sex that could be fantasy and intimacy that has, a surrealist quality to it. I mean, that's why you get films like Poor Things, which had a very regimented protocol for Emma Stone and the intimacy coordinator. There was a cold shower that started and ended every day of work as a portal going in and out of this fantasy world for Emma Stone as the one embodying it. And I love that. I think having these rituals for sort of entering and exiting something that might be a little bit more fantastical and a little bit more surreal, I think that can be a really useful technique. But, it's also comes down to what the scene is, right? When it's a scene of two lovable people having the wonderful regular sex that they have, like When Harry Met Sally kind of rom-com moment. If we see it as, realistic and lovely, and we appreciate those qualities, right? It makes us feel very connected to the material. But then you get a challenging presentation, a sexual assault scene like Irreversible, the Gaspar Noé film, which of course is famously controversial and often framed as one of the worst things that have ever been created for the general public to consume. How could you do this? There's this infamous scene of assault upon Monica Bellucci, one of the most beloved, beautiful actresses of all time. And I stand by that as well and say it's important to include depictions like that in the media because, again, realism, that could not have been more it was shown in its entirety, is what I'll say. That was not a scene that was cut short. And that is what makes it so immensely painful. And that is what makes it so potent in that discomfort, is that the director and the decisions made in how we edited or how that scene was edited decided to not hide any of it. In the case of it being a loving moment, that can feel really good. In the case of it being a horrific instance, that can feel really bad.
Right. So, you mentioned a few examples of intimate scenes that you've noticed that are either, sort of good or bad. And so it has me thinking about how myself as a sex educator and researcher, the way that I watch sex scenes is probably different from most audiences because I'm just thinking about it and analyzing it on a different level. And it's actually why I intentionally don't watch a lot of movies and TV shows that have sex scenes, because it feels like work for me because my sex researcher brain is going off. But I'm curious, it sounds like from your perspective that, whenever you're watching an intimate scene, you're thinking through a lot of these different things about it and analyzing the scene on a totally different level than most people probably are.
Completely. I try to still reserve the ability to turn off that Terminator brain when I'm, just consuming a great film or a great stage play. It's always going to be something that I'll take note of and I'll think, oh, okay. But more than anything, what I notice in today's, let's say I'm watching a film and the sex scene comes up, I'm actually watching a lot of the editing these days, and I'm seeing where the potential discomfort of the audience is being really catered to. And that could be even in like a loving scene. It's not always about sexual aggression or sexual danger that we see that an edit come in. But I think that there is a fear around whether or not a film can be, or a project can be, globally accepted and liked when it comes to sex and how much of it we show. So I'm actually really watching editing these days, and I'm going, oh, well, that was cut really short, or interesting. We're trying to convey the intensity of the scene without revealing nudity to stay within a rating or to stay within a comfort level for the audience. So I'm actually watching it in that way now. But of course, yeah, I mean, the blocking and what kind of interaction you're seeing between the performers, all of that is, of course, mapped very carefully when an intimacy coordinator is involved.
Yeah, and you're clearly watching these from a very meta perspective, right? Because there's that perspective of the director and the creative team behind it. There's the perspective of the performers. There's the intimacy coordinator at the intersection, but then there's also the audience and what they're comfortable or uncomfortable with, and lots of different considerations there that all go into how an intimate scene is either included or not included, or how it is filmed and how long it is and all those other things. There's a lot more that goes into this than people might think. It's not just like two people show up on set and, strip down and have sex or simulated sex. It's not like that at all.
No, there's investors that need to guarantee an enormous return on their investment. And a lot of the times that can hinge on whether or not the film can be shown to a large audience, a small audience. Will it be loved by an audience? So the production and the director can really decide how much that's going to weigh on how they tell the intimate scene. But my job is always to ensure that whatever the depiction is, that, yeah, we're going about it ethically and respectfully. But some of those other considerations I have nothing to do with.
Yeah. Well, Laura, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our conversation on the next episode and talking all about what real life, everyday people can learn from intimacy coordinators in terms of having hotter, healthier, more connected sexual experiences. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work?
Thank you so much, Justin. You can find everything about me at thelauradesiree.com.
Great, and I'll be sure to include a link to that in the show notes. Thanks again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller, and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.